because you know it takes. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Brian O'Hare. I serve as the Dean for the College of Rural and Community Development, or CRCD for short. Thank you all for gathering with us for our first presentation in the new year of our CRCD Research Speaker Series, which highlights our amazing and diverse faculty research and projects. The series focuses on community-based research, Indigenous knowledge in academia, and best practices for ethical research. For today's presentation, we are joined by our faculty from the Social and Human Development Department, Dr. Diane McEachern. Dr. McEachern has been a full-time faculty at the Kuskokwim campus for almost 20 years and is a professor of rural human services and human services. Dr. McEachern's teaching is focused on the adult Indigenous learner and content specific to Indigenous ways of knowing, social work, and community change. She was a recipient of the Usabelli Distinguished Teaching Award in 2020. So congratulations again to Diane. And so as we're about to get started, please keep your videos and microphones off during the duration of the presentation to limit distractions and internet issues. After the presentation, please submit your questions via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And this presentation will be recorded and published to the CRCD website following this event. So without further ado, I am much excited to introduce you all, if you haven't met her, to Diane McEachern. She's a wonderful and amazing and just a wealth of knowledge and a huge part of our college. So with that, Diane.
Oh my gosh, Brian. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here. And I hope you enjoy and reflect a little bit on what I'm going to share with you today. I'm out in Bethel, and I live and work on the same lands as the Yupik and Chupik people who've lived here for thousands of years. I've lived here 24 years. And I'm very grateful to the people here and the lands that they have lived on for so long. Today, I want to share with you what these lands and people have taught me. And I wonder if you'll relate to any of my stories. Lessons about teaching, learning and healing, and being a real person. Those lessons include how I share with you today. So let's see how I do. To begin our time together, I'm going to run through some slides of the land, elders, and students who have led me to the topics I'm going to cover today. I won't narrate while I go through these slides, so let's all just sit quietly as I go through the slides and take a couple of deep breaths and kind of settle yourself in so that we can have a focused time together. I'm going to screen share here. Slideshow. And these are the lands that have influenced me. And the elders, all of the elders you see are part of the program that I teach in. And the students. So to begin, I'm going to begin in the Philippines in 1984. In 1984, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I lived in the northern Luzon mountains of the Philippines. I lived with the Ibeloy people, a tribe that lived in those mountains. It was about an 8-hour hike to get to the small village that I lived in. The Ibeloy people believe there are spirits in all beings, plants and animals, and they call these anitos. And you have to be very careful with anitos. They can be tricky. One late day, I was with a group hiking through the mountains there, back to the village. Ibeloy people, when they hike in a group, they always put the weakest hiker goes first in order to assure the pace is not too fast. Strongest hikers go last. Customarily, I was always first in line, an additional courtesy since I was a visitor. As it became darker, the Ibeloy lit grass torches to light their way. One man came up to me and asked me to go to the back of the line. There were about 10 of us, and a feeling of pride washed over me. I'm a strong hiker. Oh my gosh, I felt very good about that. I took up my place at the end of the line, and I asked the person ahead of me, why did they move me to the back of the line? And he said, well, when it gets dark, the anitos come out, and they sometimes like to snatch the last hiker. Well, suddenly I didn't feel so good about being last anymore. And I said, wait, what about me? Won't they snatch me? And he said, well, no, they won't snatch you because you don't believe in them. And later I reflected on that story, realizing that the Ibeloy had leveraged my outsiderness as a protective shield. And I reflected on that for a long time. And when I enter my classroom nowadays, I wonder, how can I mediate my Westernness, my outsiderness, so that it's not harmful to my students? I represent a white teacher who led one student to tell me years ago, I'm waiting for you to make me feel stupid. While that stings, it's also important that I know that. The program I teach in is the Rural Human Service Program, and I'm going to give you a little context and then go on with some sharing about my time there. So the RHS program, it's a 2-year program. It's 1 week a month for 2 academic years. It's a closed cohort. We start with 20 to 25 Indigenous adult learners here at the Kuskokwim campus. They fly in or come in from Bethel. Elders are a foundation and part of the instructional team. I always teach with 2 elders. It's a very holistic learning environment, experiential based, and we cover some of the hardest social issues in Alaska. In this classroom, a key part of our learning involves having elders there, as I mentioned, as part of the instructional team. Now, I'm going to be honest with you here, and I'm going to be honest throughout my sharing today. When I started teaching in the RHS program, there were elders in the classroom, and it probably sounds really good to have them there, and it is good. But in the beginning, for me, at first, it was not at all comfortable. Walking into the classroom with 25 adult Indigenous students and at least 2 elders, in the beginning, the anxiety and apprehension of the students was almost palpable in those first few courses. Some are flooded with memories of education long ago when they needed, essentially, to leave much of their cultural, historical selves at the door in order to succeed in a university or K-12 education setting. In my research of women's experiences of RHS, one student said to me, "I felt I wasn't adequate somehow because of my past experience with education. When I first went into RHS, I felt like I was stupid all over again." My students aren't the only ones that were nervous in the beginning. When I started teaching, when I glanced over at the 2 elders, my own nerves jumped. I had my syllabus, experiential activities, and a curriculum for the week. But in the beginning, I had not learned how to work with elders in the classroom. I was uncomfortable with them because I had not grown up with elders, and my understanding of their cultural role was shallow at best. A concern for me is whether they would detract from the curriculum. I mean, I think about this now and I'm just kind of surprised, but I'm being honest with you about my experience of my own growth and development, if you will. And I have shared this story many times with elders. So yeah. So I worried about whether they would detract from the curriculum learning outcomes embedded in the syllabus. Would they take the class in a direction unrecognizable to my teaching goals for the week? Sometimes I caught myself dreading their time to speak, and I noted this internal impatience. And it was important to me as I sifted through reactions such as these to engage a reflective process that promoted my ability, my taking responsibility for these reactions. My impulse to control the classroom was colonial in the guise of, or one could say protection of, institutional curriculum integrity. It was also born of my own fears, to be honest. In his book, The Courage to Teach, Parker Palmer writes, "If we embrace the promise of diversity, we face the fear that a live encounter with otherness will challenge or even compel us to change our lives." He goes on to say that otherness always invites transformation. And so it was with me. I was fearful of losing control of the classroom, of making cross-cultural errors in front of the students, and my own distance from understanding elders. It would be my responsibility then to own those fears and find a way to transform them and myself. I drew upon 2 values within the Yupik culture that I witnessed often in my work out here. My stand, as I use those, I drew upon 2 values that I noticed in Yupik culture that I saw as a path for for this transformation. My stance became one of careful listening and observing, 2 characteristics I often observed with Yupik people. These 2 Yupik values guided me as I confronted my fears. As I observed students, however, I noticed they seemed to relax when elders spoke. That is, my own apprehension was rarely, if ever, mirrored by my students. It turns out I was the only one uncomfortable. While I interviewed Indigenous graduates of the RHS program, they said that seeing an elder in the university classroom made them relax. They felt that the elder's presence let them know that it was okay and they would not lose their identity in this university classroom. I settled into a feeling then of humility. as I detected a synergy between elders and students that initially I didn't share. I listened carefully to elder stories, and I relaxed my struggle to pinpoint elements that fit the week's curriculum. To be honest, the curriculum was, in fact, being shared and learned. But sometimes I think of it like this, sometimes my white eyes couldn't see it. During breaks, I sat with the elders and asked their advice on next directions to take with the class, or just enjoyed being with them. It took time, but I finally changed. I clearly recall the day at the end of the first year of my teaching when both elders were not in class during the first morning. This was rare. This was a rare occurrence due to doctor's appointments that they had, and they were going to be in class after lunch. After lunch, the two elders arrived, and a wave of relief flooded my body. Tension I had carried throughout the morning that I wasn't aware of drained out of me, and I took delight in greeting them. I also felt that I grew within me a genuine appreciation and need for the elders' presence in my classes. I mean, even telling you right now, I kind of get choked up because this is such a vivid memory for me. As a non-Indigenous woman, I had found an authentic, slowly cultivated way of being with Yupik elders. But my learning didn't end there. I had so much to learn. And as elders often tell us in our class, you're just going to be learning for the rest of your life. So you might as well just go with it and accept that. The social issues that confront the region infiltrate our classroom. RHS students are frontline social service providers who live and work often in remote villages and are impacted directly or indirectly by what we study in class. In the RHS classroom, learning and healing are coterminous, or meaning to say they happen at the same time. Learning contributes to healing, and healing adds to learning. This holistic orientation dovetails with Yupik culturally infused beliefs about the interrelated nature of life and experience, and it makes for a really dynamic classroom. Students sift through new information through their own life experiences and develop skills along with reflecting upon their own lives that have been impacted by the same issues their communities face. RHS uses talking circles, small support group discussions, and journaling as some of the tools to aid students in integrating healing, learning, and new skill development. As an instructor in this environment, it took me some time to understand the commingling of learning and healing. In my university classes, students didn't cry, or in many of my university classes, be it my bachelor's or my master's, my PhD, I often didn't know anyone's personal story or how their personal story connected with what we were learning in class. But in RHS, all of that is in the classroom. My ongoing reflexivity uncovered another aspect of how, as a social worker, I perceived this process of engagement that students experienced, and my awareness of an internal bias that I had startled me. When considering my social work education, certainly there were courses geared toward cross-cultural understanding and cultural competency. There would be chapter readings. There would be chapters outlining best practices with particular population groups, all of which were minorities. There were no chapters on counseling white people. I think this encouraged in me a bias that the designated helper is not a minority, but instead is someone white like me. It was through teaching and interacting in the RHS classroom that I discovered an additional bias that I had. That is, of viewing the designated client in this context as Alaska Native. I began to interrogate my own interpretations of what I witnessed in the classroom. Did I see, and these are the hard questions I asked myself, did I see my adult Indigenous students as clients in some way? With healing and learning inseparable, could I understand that dynamic through a culturally respectful framework rather than the duality of client and clinician? I felt challenged by this insight because I knew I swayed in the direction of clinical duality. The easy clinical rubric that allowed me to be the distant clinician and the students the vulnerable client needed to be unpacked and reconceptualized. There's an anthropologist I like, Ruth Behar, and in her book, The Vulnerable Observer, Anthropology That Breaks Your Heart, she describes the significance of life history and life story merging as a key form of approaching and transforming reality. And that's what my students were doing. Over time, I was unable to maintain a precise distance, and the duality of clinician and client disappeared. I was not only learning about my students, but also myself. This organic experience of learning about myself through my students, and to learning about my students through myself, culminated in realizing that rather than the designated client, I now understood and understand my adult students as my current, developing, and future colleagues and peers. But my learning didn't end there. My students had aspirations, okay? Rather than a career path or a resume builder, participation in RHS for many is a route towards saving their people and changing history. And let me tell you, as a faculty, when your students are in your class for that, check your syllabus out and see if it's part of your learning outcomes to change history and save the lives of your people. I didn't have that on my syllabus directly. When I first heard students periodically making this kind of comment about their commitment to learning, I was thrown off a bit. In my academic life as a student, I'd not heard classmates say this. Certainly we were there to help others, but I'd not heard anyone contextualize their social work education in terms of survival as a people. The RHS students often reflected upon and contextualized their learning beyond themselves through the classroom and onto their communities. One student told me that when she learns and heals in RHS, she feels that her village is also healing. Spiraling back and forth through their own and their community's experiences while in community with other Indigenous learners was not only empowering for students, but for many life-changing, as well as enabling a more hopeful vision for their communities and tribes. The stakes were high, and I often struggled to keep up, move beyond my syllabus, and allow those high stakes to educate me. As I admired my students' commitment to their education, I started to think about what my version of such a commitment could be. As someone in academics, it was a bit obvious. I needed to go for my PhD. Inspired by my students, encouraged by the elders, I sought out a PhD program that would allow me to study adult learning and the teaching of social work to Indigenous peoples. And so I made a parallel commitment to learning more about how to do the very best teaching. So as I kind of wind down a little bit, I think I'm going to be a little short, so I hope you all have questions or comments. One thing I like to tell my students at the start of RHS, when most are nervous, worried they cannot succeed in a Western education setting, I acknowledge that in the past, yes, they had to leave many parts of themselves at the door in order to succeed in a Western education setting. Then I say, in order to succeed in this university program, they're going to have to bring their whole selves in. I say that if they try to be Western-ish, it won't work out as well. Periodically when I say this, and I can remember sometimes years ago in the very beginning of RHS, I would explain that on the first day of the 2 years. And some students would start crying. It had such an impact on them. As I tie these stories up, I remember something that occasionally happens in RHS and reminded me of my story that I told you at the start about the Ibaloi. Our RHS classroom rarely has lengthy lecturing. The learning community we create is active, experiential, learning from each other, from the elders, resources. But periodically, toward the end of the 2 years, a student, and I remember this happening, a student would ask me, Diane, can you go ahead and do that Western teacher thing of lecturing and we'll just take notes? And I'm like, okay, you want to lecture? Get your notebooks out, let's go. And in that moment, my Westernness is not a weapon, but a tool that they may use as they see fit. I'm going to finish with a quote from Elder Esther Green, who's in our program quite a bit. She describes kind of what I've presented to you this way. RHS touches everybody's hearts and teaches each person as a whole, spiritually, mentally, physically, and culturally. It leads a person to explore one's life to start with before becoming a frontline worker. You have to heal first before you can help others. RHS has helped the students as well as me as an elder with reawakening to self, others, our surroundings, and has been an inspiration to everyone. We take what we learn and use it to heal ourselves, families, communities. This is how my people will survive. And that is my talk for today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane. And thank you, audience. If any of you have questions at this time, you could either raise or post it in the chat, and we will get to that now.
If anyone is interested, some of what I spoke on today, I have written a couple of journal articles that contain some of these stories as well as more theoretical information. And then I also have a chapter in a book edited by Dr. Hilary Weaver, and I'd be happy to send those out.
Looks like you have, looks like Amelia raised her hand.
Am I reading the question? I don't see it. Oh, Amelia. Oh, hi. Oh, I know Amelia. Hi, Amelia.
Yeah.
Yay.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to let you guys know that chat is still disabled. So during the talk, so we can only raise our hands. I really appreciate your talk, Diane. I worked with you for many years during different programs, and I'm really happy that that you shared this insight with others on working with elders. My question is, as you share your work working with elders, are you helping other non-Indigenous faculty adjust to working with elders as they approach how to integrate more elders into their programs? Thanks.
Okay, that's a great question. Because coincidentally, about 3 years ago, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the vice president and sort of his entourage came to the Kuskokwim campus, and they were, UAA had sent them out to see the nursing program. But we had breakfast with them, a couple of the elders, students, and myself. We described the program, how we teach, how they learn, the role of the elders. And it was really interesting because the vice president then turned to me. He asked me similar to what you did, Amelia. He said, you should be telling other faculty about this. He goes, do you do that? And I said, I'm kind of busy. I'm out here in Bethel, but yes, I'm sure that'd be a great idea. Well, he wrote me later, and he wrote me and said, what would you do with $50,000? Now, any of you who have ever written grants, you never get you never get a delivery like that. And I wrote back and I said, well, I guess I would do a 3-day workshop on indigenizing pedagogy for UAF faculty. He said, okay, money's yours. They let me carry the money over during the COVID years because I wanted to do it in person. And this past August, 32 university faculty, most of which were non-Indigenous, we did a 3-day workshop on indigenizing pedagogy. We did monthly gatherings to see how they were doing, because part of their commitment in joining the 3-day workshop that we held up in Fairbanks was they would choose a course that they would begin to integrate Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. Because here's the thing I'm always stressing. Indigenous ways of knowing and learning are good for everyone, not just Indigenous people, right? So look what I got out of it. I'll look at this learning I've done and the way my life has been affected. So we did monthly gatherings. Then we had First Alaskans did a workshop with us in November online. And then we had Dr. Michael Yellowbird, who also talked to us and did a small speaking with us on indigenizing curriculum at a university level. So as a matter of fact, tomorrow, the team that I work with is Richenda Bettisworth George and Jessica Black and Laverne Dementoff and Jackie Tagaban and Sally Sampson and Robin Henry and Kendall Sadiq. We're going to get together and debrief where we're at with this and what our next efforts are moving forward. So that's the answer to your question, Amelia. It turns out we are doing some things with this. Yeah. Oh, I see all these comments. Okay. So were there other comments or questions?
Yeah, you've got a question in the chat group.
There's a lot of, do you see the question, Jordan? Are you able to read it?
Yeah, so Kate asked, where can we find the papers that you said you would share? Will we get an email?
Okay. So Jordan, is there a way that I send that to you and it gets provided, or what would be the route for that? Or how should I do? I can just send them to Kate.
Yeah, you can send them to me.
Okay, I'll send them to Jordan. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So so are there other people who want just to make comments about what you've heard or what you're doing in this regard, or ways you may have related to the personal experience of engaging in this way? Okay, Bruce, your hand's up.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Really appreciate your discussion today, and it's really informal and learned a lot from it. And I think for myself as a professor of learning how to teach language and art, I was just kind of curious how you kind of get an idea or distinguish between a more like I guess traditional way of teaching or a more native way of teaching versus the Western style, and were your elders really helpful in trying to figure that out? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. It was a little hard to hear you. There was a little bit of static on the line, but so I think you're asking about navigating sort of Western way of teaching and a more Indigenous way. And so in my context, the groups that I teach in, I always have elders there. And I tend to meet with I sometimes meet with elders ahead of class. I tell them what the topic is. the kind of things that we need to cover. And that gives them time to kind of think about it and figure out how they want to be there to, help with that. I would say that part of doing this is really building community within the class of students and helping them, also teaching each other and integrating what they're hearing from the elders and what they're reading. For example, if we're doing Introduction to Psychology, which is a very Western textbook. So we take what's in the textbook, I ask them to think about their culture, what they ate as children, where they played, how their parents were, what their village life was like. So I try to have it where they need to bring all of that to whatever Western content there is and sort of grapple with it and pick and choose what seems to resonate or what seems to add and build on their cultural context. And so these are really engaging. We do a lot of discussion, a lot of conversation about this. I have different activities. Sometimes students will interview elders. Sometimes I'll have students share with an elder something out of their textbook. And in that way, they practice sharing back with the elder, which elders really appreciate. And it helps them to take what they're learning and put it in down to earth, easy to understand language, and then hear from the elder how the elder interprets that. And I will say also in my classes, the elders, they love learning. They love learning the psychology and, the counseling skills and addiction treatment. And so it's really wonderful in that way. It's like learning is a living experience. So it's never, well, there's just this Western and now we'll switch over to this Indigenous and then we'll switch back over to the Western. We really strive to have the integration. And then the people who are really in charge of that integration are the students as they kind of navigate things. And I don't know if that kind of gets at what you were asking, Bruce, because it was a little staticky on the line, but I hope that gives you some idea.
Yes, that really helps. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, now, so should I read this? Oh, Sarah Peterson, look at you. Sarah's one of the students. She's a graduate of RHS. So Sarah, did you ask? Oh, thank you, Diane. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. I don't know if everyone can see the comment that was, I thought it was a question, but Sarah. Yeah, I might have a couple students in the group, so they can let me know if I missed something. That was a beautiful comment, Sarah. Thank you. So one thing that sometimes happens is, this happened years ago when I was up in Fairbanks, a faculty who's since retired and this doesn't really matter, but this faculty was presenting to me sort of a critique of this kind of learning environment. And some of the things they mentioned were, they did ask me, do you really think your students are real university students? And I think this person was getting at, it was very hard to understand in an engaging, holistic environment where there may be crying, there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of frustration, there's all the emotions that go with living and experiencing life and some of the difficulties of life. And they, and I kind of responded, well, I'm contracted by the university to provide two to three university credits. So yes, they're university students. And if you think they're not, then you should really question me, because my job is to provide university credits. And they were like, no, I'm not talking about you. You're fine, but you're students. And I said, no, don't do that. And actually the conversation I had with this person really also kind of jump-started me to go for my PhD, because I thought, wow, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's going on, and I need to learn more about it so that I can better represent my students and what we do in our classes together. Another comment that I sometimes get is, well, all that emotion in the classroom. I mean, Diane, shouldn't you be referring? Now, my students, y'all, if any of my students are on here, I want you to laugh at this, okay? Because this person said, well, shouldn't you refer them to the social worker or the school counselor? Like, because at KUC, we have a wellness counselor. And I thought, well, then I'd have to refer everyone. But that's not really what's going on. And sometimes when I was uncomfortable, we do check-ins every morning, and people check in about different things going on in their life, and maybe someone becomes tearful or they're crying. And I used to be uncomfortable with that. And then I looked around the room and saw everyone was okay. Nobody was uncomfortable. And I thought, well, here we go again. I am the only one uncomfortable. So I am the one that needs to deal with this. And then, that person will cry, and then that one will say something really funny, and that one will explain about something else. It's so holistic that you just kind of relax and go with it. Everyone is okay. But I think to somebody who's not familiar with teaching in this way, this would be disconcerting a little bit in the classroom. Jackie, you have your hand up. See, Jackie's one of the Indigenous pedagogy committee members.
Thanks. Hi, Diane. Thanks
Hello.
again. Yeah, thanks so much for everything that you shared. It's really such a beautiful model. And I do feel like, it's funny to say, as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous faculty, that, that we also struggle very much with providing Indigenous pedagogy. But certainly we all can say that we have gone through this Western system, and that's why we are at the point we're at in terms of being faculty. And so it is a lot of letting go. It's a lot of sort of acknowledging that this is okay, right? Because it isn't exactly the Western classroom that you might think it is, or that you sort of expected you'd be teaching in. And so that's a process in and of itself. And I think, Diane, you've been a really big part of my experience as a faculty, as a mentor, and as, I was able to participate in that Indigenous pedagogy workshop last fall, and all of the follow-up things that we've done. It's really been a wonderful experience. And I have been able to incorporate some really valuable small little things. Even I teach through audio conference and on Blackboard Collaborate. So we're not face to face, but there's a lot of little things that we've started to do: land acknowledgements, the First Alaska Institute agreements, really finding more papers and books that sort of outline and recognize and acknowledge the stories of Indigenous people that become a part of our readings throughout the semester. All of those things, I think, really have allowed my students, who are mostly Indigenous, to really feel like this is a space that belongs to them. This university classroom environment does recognize us as Indigenous people. So all of that, I think, is really, again, small things, but all important. But I also think that it would be helpful, and maybe you talked about this, I got in a little bit late, but maybe you talked a little bit already, but just about recognizing this model that you use, this delivery mode that you use, because it's really a beautiful way of creating relationships. And we know that's really important for Indigenous people, is having relationships, and something that could be replicated in a lot of different disciplines, I think. So I wonder if you could just take a minute to share a little bit about your delivery model.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Jackie, because periodically, And in the Interior Alaska campus, in their RHS program, they do have a handful of people who are actually non-native, and they really have embraced this too as a really valuable way of learning. And sometimes one time I taught a MSW course with UAA. It was a distance course, and there was only one Indigenous person in the class, and everyone else was non-native. I believe most were white, actually. And I had a cross-cultural experience because I wasn't used to teaching white people. And our people, we ask about grades all the time. We're concerned with, have you read my paper yet? And it's very not really enjoying small group work. And so I think there's bridging that would have to be done in order to fully bring more of this model into more and more mixed classrooms, or classrooms where people have grown up and have been rewarded for a Western education system. And so I think there would be challenges to that, and they're worthwhile challenges. But that's kind of, something I often think about as well. And just the funniness of, if I'm with all white people, I feel like I'm in a cross-cultural teaching moment, because I'm so used to now this in the Indigenous context. So in a way, I'm kind of blessed because all my students are Indigenous, so I get to stay on the right track with this. But I do think, and it's something I've kind of been exploring more. Okay, how would this work then in other classroom settings? And so I don't have a lot of clear insights on that right now, but I think it's a really worthwhile question to think about. And that's kind of what I've been doing lately. So, yeah, thank you. Yes, I see another hand, but I don't want to mispronounce your first name, Peter, last name Peter. Go ahead.
Shinlight, you should have the
Okay.
option.
Okay, I unmuted. Sorry about that. I just want to say that I really enjoyed this talk. And I think it's, I'm the Gwich'in instructor here at the university, and getting ready to retire. But anyway, I'm really enjoyed this because I know that lots of healing needs to occur, and it sounds like it's occurring in your class from the trauma of social injustices. And so I really enjoyed hearing, and how your students have just really opened up about their feelings. And I want to jump off from where Jackie left off about, how to indigenize your class and get people to really understand empirical, or I don't know what you call them, articles. And so one of the things that I do is I teach about second language acquisition. And it took me one whole semester to find writings by Indigenous people that talked about attitudes and, everything like that. So that's what I incorporate into a class that I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays about methods for teaching in Indigenous language, and specific to Indigenous people. And so right now I'm developing a course on introducing third-year students to the stories, the traditional stories. And I cannot, for the life of me, find any articles that that address that. So I might just have to be the one to write that article. But I just wanted to say that I just really enjoyed this talk, and thank you for sharing.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. And yes, you may have to do that writing yourself. Go for it. You know, one thing I also think about, like reflecting on some of the comments here. One time, some years ago, I asked my students if they thought there was something wrong with them, something wrong with Yupik people. And a lot of the students raised their hand because they were, you know, why are we like that? Why do we have this issue and that issue? We didn't used to have any of this. And so I really try to reinforce that, of course, there's nothing wrong with Yupik people, but something was done to Yupik people that was wrong, and that was colonization. And so all of my courses, from interpersonal growth and development to counseling skills to addictions treatment, you know, all the different courses they take over the 2 years, I try to ground it in where is the link to colonization and this outcome we see now, and what kind of historical healing has also happened along with the trauma. And like Laverne Dementoff, she writes about that a lot, and which I really appreciate. And that any people that are beset with the kinds of trauma brought by colonization will show some fracturing. So it isn't really because they're Yupik, it's because colonization is just a lot, you know, is very dangerous and traumatizing. And so I can see the empowerment in my students develop. Once they have an understanding of the context of how these things developed, that it was outside of who they were, it was an outside thing, you know, force, traumatizing force. It becomes a very, you know, they become a lot more empowered. And I can remember one of the students had gone to a conference and she had spoken about this, and somebody asked her, how did you learn all of that? Because she usually went to conferences and was very quiet. A lot of conferences she went to, there weren't a lot of Indigenous people, and she had gotten the confidence and courage to be able to speak out. And that's another thing that students report after the 2 years. They talk about how much more confident they are, how much more willing they are to speak out. And in my class, students are asked to speak a lot. They have to do a lot of group presentations, come before the class and kind of share what they're learning. And but over 2 years, and you can imagine every month for a week, it's very intense, and we get very close. And so I really appreciate that healing, that's healing from the colonization that's still happening on some levels. So I wanted to mention something like that.
Diane, you had a question in the chat. Are you planning on future workshops for UA faculty and staff, similar to the one you offered last year?
Right, yeah, so I'll be talking, our committee will be meeting tomorrow, and we're going to be debriefing how our semester went along with our training, and looking at next steps. And we do want to offer it again. And so we'll start to look at where do we land within the university to get university support for this. And yes, so the answer is yes, but we're not sure how it's going to go. And what is the name of your course? So in the Rural Human Service Program, there are about 15 classes. And so they're a whole wide range of content for behavioral health and well-being. So you could look up rural human services and it would give you a master list of all the courses, but these are closed cohorts, so they aren't courses that people can register for and just attend. So.
And then Amelia asks, is there a website for the training materials?
What training materials are you thinking of? Are you talking about the Indigenous pedagogy workshop that we did? Because we did have a lot of materials from there, and I upload everything up to a Canvas site. And Amelia, I can give you access to that, and you would have access to the speakers that facilitated some of our work together, resources they provided, all kinds of materials. So Amelia, is that what you were talking about, the indigenizing pedagogy materials? Not sure if, okay. Okay, so I think, just winding down, I mean, I'll go back to those slides. I just thank the land out here, the elders, and, all of my students. I feel like when I walk into RHS, there is a lot of love and compassion in our class and in the teaching that happens. So, I just want to honor that. I joke with my students, every RHS cohort, now Sarah, yours is my favorite, don't worry, but every RHS cohort, I kind of fall in love with them, just fall in love with what we're doing together. And then the next cohort comes and I go, oh, well, now I'm in love with this one. And it just goes every 2 years, I go through this process. And so anyway, it's a wonderful
all right.
thing I have out here. So Jordan,
Thank
you can wrap us up.
so much, Diane. Yeah, are you okay with us providing your email for any follow-up questions?
Oh, I would love that. Yes, totally. I
Okay.
really welcome that. So
Excellent.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending.
Thank
I
you
want to let
so
you all know.
much.
Yes, thank you so much. The next series event will be on February 8th, featuring Dr. Mike Koski. So please join us for that. And thank you again, Diane, for that excellent presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. All right.